I want to talk about behavioral barriers to energy efficiency adoption, and can we do things to make metrics more useful to the energy consumers, the end consumers. The major obstacles that we've spent a lot of time talking about really can be broken down into two categories. We can think of motivational ones. Do people not care about energy and the environment? Do we not have the right price incentives? If you're an economist, you want to try to fix things that way. If you're a psychologist, you might think about barriers like people over-discount the future. They don't like paying out of pocket for energy efficiency investments now. These are the kind of standard package of motivations, and arguably these are the important places to really get people's attention and getting them to move in the right direction. But another piece is the information that they use to make decisions. And I know that there's some debate about, does information alone get people to change behavior? For me, at least, it comes down to this, which is if we can motivate them to want to go in the right direction, they then need to apply that energy, if you pardon the pun, to the good information to get to the right place. So you need that combination of both motivation and information to get better decisions in the end. And so if we think about what are the metrics that could be available for energy and how you would use them, there are two main ways in which people would use metrics of energy use. One is at the time of a purchase of a major technology, so a car, an appliance, an air conditioner. It matters if you care about energy at that point, either because of the cost or the environment, then you need to have good information at that point of purchase. It's often a big investment, and it's worth trying to get that right. So at least for some people, this is appealing to them. And then the second place we hear a lot about is to think about feedback, where we hope that there's some real-time adjustments to the sort of information that you're getting. And we also have, so first of all, there's absent feedback most of the time. So this is, of course, the major step we're trying to make, which is to provide feedback. But then we have choices about how do we express it as energy or money, in small time frames or large time frames. So I'll touch on that a bit as well. Now, the three principles I'm going to propose are, there's a lot of efficiency metrics that are out there. When we're trying to evaluate what technology to adopt, I think it misleads us. I'm going to use a car example as the main one, but I'll also argue that it extends to other technologies. And the implication here is we need consumption metrics, not efficiency metrics. I'll illustrate this if it's obscure at this point. We also should, when we give feedback to people, do something I'm going to call expanding it, which is make the numbers salient by scaling them to a realistic but large level of use so that people see that it makes a difference when they change their behavior. And then a third principle that I think is very intuitive, and people are doing lots of variations on this, but think about ways of translating the energy use to the thing that hits home for a given person, but there's some tailoring that may be involved. Some people may care about the environment and focus on greenhouse gases. Others will focus on costs. All right, so let me illustrate this distinction between efficiency and consumption, and I'll use what is a very well-known measure in the United States, which is miles per gallon. It's what we've grown up with. We all think we know what it means, and it leads to lots of distorted perceptions and bad decisions as a result of it. So what is MPG good for? It is a good metric, but it's good for one specific thing, at least in my mind, which is knowing how far you can go on a tank of gas. And I know it's been useful to me at times when I'm on the highway, I'm 3 exits away from home, the needle's getting close to empty, I need to figure out, can I make it to my home exit and my usual gas station, and I'm quickly doing the math, okay, I have half a tank, I get 30 miles to the gallon, etc. So MPG is good for that. But what I'm going to argue it's not good for is all kinds of judgments about how much gas am I using. It's just too hard to get from MPG to gas consumption. And what I think we really care about when we buy a car is, how much gas am I going to use? And I want to try to minimize that. And I might care about it once again because of costs or because of the environment, but that's really what I want to care about. And MPG as a measure masks the gas consumption, and it distorts our ability to understand how much gas we're using. All right, so here's the problem. Imagine 3 car owners. One owns an awful SUV that gets 10 miles per gallon. Another owns a kind of minivan, let's say, at 16 miles per gallon. One owns an efficient car at 33 miles per gallon. They're all thinking about a trade-in. They all drive it the same distance every year. The SUV owner is going to trade it in for an 11 MPG car. Minivan owner will trade it in for a 20 MPG car, and the efficient car owner at 33 trades it in for 50. Who's going to save the most gas? Well, our intuition is really drawn to that nice leap from 33 to 50. That's got to be the one that's going to save us the most gas. But I've rigged these numbers so, in fact, they all save the same amount of gas over 10,000 miles of driving. So even though 10 to 11 is a small percentage change and it's a lousy 1 mile improvement, it's going to be the same amount of gas as that 33 to 50 improvement. And let me just show you how to think about the math and start introducing this idea of a consumption metric rather than an efficiency metric. So here's one way to, first of all, how do you get this answer? You just divide a distance, like 100 miles, by MPG to see how much gas you're going to use. So I've got two columns here translating MPG on the left to either gallons per 100 miles, which I'll anticipate is like the European system for expressing fuel efficiency, or gallons per 10,000 miles, which really makes the numbers pop to see how much you're going to be using over the course of what would be a year's driving and how much you can save by making some incremental improvement. And the thing that leaps out to me is all the gains that we're going to have is in the teens and getting people into the 20s. If you can, so just to back up a little bit, 10 to 11 saves you about 100 gallons every 10,000 miles. 33 to 50 saves you 100 gallons every 10,000 miles. So it's that same gallon. Now, I'm not advocating people stop at 11 mpg, but I am arguing that if we want to really make a difference on improving and reducing gas consumption, the place to focus people's attention and policy and everything is getting that movement in the teens into the 20s. That's where the big gains are. So just getting one person to go from 14 to 25 mpg knocks out 300 gallons every 10,000 miles. That's more than you can ever get by getting someone in a 33 mpg vehicle to improve their vehicle. So that's the place where you've got to get people's attention and get people to act. And then just if you're more visual and think graphically, it's just a reciprocal, which is why it has a very steep region on the left and very flat on the right. But you can see that there's a point in the kind of 10 to 30 mpg region where there's a lot of improvement, and then it does get pretty flat. So as you think about trying to move from a 50 to 100 mpg car, you're squeezing out efficiency on something that's highly efficient and not making much difference. The game is in the teens and 20s to really make a big difference in greenhouse gas emissions. And so the basic argument that I want to make is that people get this wrong. I have some empirical evidence showing this. So we tested this illusion in a paper that was published in Science a couple of years ago, just asking people to judge where are the gas savings, which sort of trade-ins lead to the biggest gas savings. And so we gave people 5 possible trade-ins, a 34 to 50 mpg trade-in, 18 to 28, 42 to 48, and so on. These are in random order for the subjects, but I've ordered them here by the biggest difference on the expectation that subjects themselves would use the difference as their cue to where the biggest gas savings are. And so when we asked them to rank it where 1 is best and 5 is worst, they gave us rankings that matched that difference between MPG. So they thought 34 to 50 has to be the best, 22 to 24 is the worst, and the others falling in between in order of how big the difference is. But at this point, you can see where I'm going, which is it turns out that isn't the right order. And 18 to 28 is, in fact, the biggest possible gain. And even 16 to 20 is a larger improvement than 34 to 50. But I think people look at those small improvements in the teens and they think it's not worthwhile. Why bother going from 17 to 20? And unfortunately, they may also be too attracted to the large gains on the high end, and we can talk about that. So there's a kind of mixed story here, which is if we correct their perceptions on the low end, there's also this danger that people will be less interested in the high end. I know in my own personal life what that means is I've decided to shift my dollars from my 30 mpg cars to things in my home. So I think if you're inclined to want to make a difference, you can think about where to allocate your investments. Okay, and I'll not actually hit this study hard, but just note that if we give people a different frame for thinking about the improvement, which is if we give them a gallons per 100 miles frame, they actually do get the answer right. And we had people think about a town that has fleets of cars that could trade out a given vehicle for a hybrid. And so without following the details of this, if we had them think about improving in the fleet a car from 15 to 19 or 34 to 44 in the MPG frame, most people want to make the 34 to 44 improvement, and they're getting it incorrect. But if we give them a consumption metric, gallons per 100 miles, the majority now actually get it correct. So essentially what you're doing is doing the math for people, and they get the answer right. So there's lots of energy calculations we might make that just are misled by MPG. If you think about a family trying to think about their average MPG, you can't average 20 and 50 to get an answer. That would be 35. The real MPG for a house that has that mix of cars is 28.5. This is how CAFE calculates things with a harmonic mean. It's obscure. No one understands this. What percent is your gas bill reduced by an improvement? It's hard to get that right. So consumption metrics actually help you answer all of these questions easily. So this is done in Canada and in Europe. India, interestingly, uses kilometers per liter, which has the same illusions as MPG. So at the time this research came out, Europeans made fun of it, saying Americans are dumb for using the imperial system, they should be using metric. But India's proof, at least, that it isn't about whether you use metric or imperial, it's about which number's on top and which one's on the bottom. You want consumption, the energy unit on top, and some measure of distance on the bottom. Okay, so let me just note, it's going to be on the new EPA labels in 2013 as a transition, I think, away from MPG to a consumption metric as it is in Europe. And I think one nice thing about thinking about gallons per mile, or some version of it, is it makes apparent things like getting small improvements on 18-wheelers actually has a huge impact. It's that steep part of the curve that we saw. So when people talk about hybrids on trucks, and it seems silly to go from 3 to 4 MPG, the consumption metric makes it transparent why that is valuable. Okay. Air conditioners are rated with the wrong number on top. Insulation is rated with the wrong number on top. IT systems are rated with the wrong number on top. All of these need an equivalent consumption metric so that we can actually see how much we save by making a switch. So the argument here is we're going to improve basic intuitions by going to a consumption metric and get rid of some misunderstanding that's caused by MPG, and just be able to take differences and averages and percentages that we can't do with MPG right now. And let me just finish with two final thoughts. If we have a consumption metric, what else can we do to get people to use the information well? One argument I'm going to make is that we can expand it to larger units of scale to get people's attention, and then translate it to these other measures. So with gallons per mile, should it be 100 miles or 10,000 miles? I like 10,000 miles because of the magnitude of the differences that you then see at that point. And then we can think about what else do we want to tell people about gas consumption in cars? Do we want to tell them greenhouse gases and costs as well? So let me show you why expansion makes a difference. This is not an energy-related study, but it gives you the flavor for it. We had, in another line of work, so subjects think about which cell phone plan to adopt. And what I have here are two attributes, the number of dropped calls per 100 calls and price per year. Where price per year is expressed on this large scale, the difference looks big, and the number of dropped calls doesn't look like it makes much difference because it's on the 100-call scale. And most people favor the cheaper plan that has more dropped calls. But we can flip this by having the drop calls be expressed per 1,000 calls, and now it's a 42 to 65 difference that looks big, and we can think about the cost being monthly, and now it's only a $5 difference, and just by changing the scaling of this information, we get people to flip, and now they'll pay more to have fewer drop calls. And the analogy with GPM is, I think scaling it up to 10,000 miles will help get people's attention more than using the European system of just thinking about 1 gallon here and there. Think about hundreds of gallons here and there, and that will actually help get people's attention. Okay, so this is the new EPA label. This is my last slide. I'll just note that, and how am I doing on time? Am I at 0?
Totally.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, so let me just note the new label has these translations and has gallons per 100 miles. I think the next step is to think about the benefit of having this much information, which is arguably too much. Do you get the benefit of calling attention to these different attributes? Okay, thank you very much.